Good evening, everyone. Welcome. I am Joe Rogers, the Director of the Center for Global Education here at the College of St. Benedict and St. John's University. This is the first of what we hope will be many Global Topics lectures that we will be sponsoring on this campus. The mission of our center is to help prepare our students for an increasingly interconnected global community. And so how do we do that? We send them abroad in very high numbers. We send more students abroad on a semester basis than any other liberal arts college in the country. But we also bring global issues to this campus. We give the students, all of our students, whether they study abroad or not, the chance to grow towards the ultimate goal of global citizenship. Part of that is helping them develop intercultural skills, helping them build a knowledge base of what's happening in the world, the problems, the issues that they'll face as they go out and live their lives. But one thing that we haven't emphasized as well is once our students know about the issues, once they've perfected their ability to communicate in different languages and understand different cultures, what can they actually do to make a change, to make a difference in the world, to look at the problems as they exist? Problems like hunger, poverty, climate change. These are the issues that our guest speaker tonight has addressed through his life's work. And those will be highlighted during his talk, but also as you look around, we have many different organizations tabling tonight, many of which our guest has been a very key part of. I just want to point them out to you real quickly. The Citizens Climate Lobby is over here for those interested in learning more about issues of climate change. We also have Results, which is an organization founded by our guest. They're in the back. Shelby's there. Their mission is to help create the political will to address the issue of world poverty. So a very ambitious goal. We also have two on-campus organizations tabling tonight. One is Square One over there, and the other one is Extending the Link. Think globally, act locally, I believe, which is in a lot of ways the theme of what we have to offer tonight. Our speaker, I think, lives that mantra of think globally, act locally. For, I mentioned global citizenship as an aspiration that we all have. But I think in reading the book, Reclaiming Our Democracy, which is available, by the way, here afterward, and perhaps our guest will be more than happy to sign a copy for it, it makes it clear that in order to be a global citizen, action is needed. And the issues and problems of a global scale can only be confronted one step at a time. And in some ways, to be a great global citizen, you must start with being a great citizen in your own community and in your own country. So I'm going to be quiet now. Again, thank you so much. I'm going to ask one of our students to come and introduce our speaker. Gretchen Hughes is a senior management major. Last summer, she spent her summer in Shanghai working for an enterprise as part of our summer internship program. We'll have Gretchen come and introduce our speaker. Thank you.
Well, when I was first asked to introduce Sam, I was incredibly honored. And then after I accepted, I thought to myself, well, I'm not a political science major, and I'm not a political science minor. So what qualifies me to introduce an individual who founded Results, which is a citizens lobby that has been creating a political will to end hunger since 1980. He then went on to found the Microcredit Summit Campaign in 1995 and the Center for Citizen Empowerment and Transformation in 2012. He's authored Reclaiming Our Democracy, which is celebrating its 20th anniversary edition and is as relevant today as it was when it was first published. He's been praised by former President Jimmy Carter, Nobel Peace Prize laureate Muhammad Yunus, and Ashoka founder Bill Drayton. Sam is healing the break between people and government by silencing the voice inside each of us that says, I don't make a difference. So as I finished the book, I asked myself the same question. What credentials qualify me to introduce Sam Daley-Harris to our CSB SJU community? I found the answer to my question in the words of a results volunteer in Minnesota. He was also empowered by Sam's vision. And he says, I learned a very important lesson that day, which was that if we all wait until we're experts with highfalutin credentials before we get into action, there's no hope for us to move forward on any of the crucial issues of our time. It is sufficient to the issue to merely be concerned and committed enough to be willing to stick your neck out and to study and speak about it. There's no PhD required to exercise one's citizenship. Reclaiming our democracy brings the realization that through commitment and passion, each of us is qualified to make a difference. Similar to the results communities throughout the globe, we here at CSB SJU may seem small in number, but we're connected through a network of individuals that also spans our entire globe. Sam has and continues to empower networks like ours all around the world. And tonight, I know he will inspire, and as Muhammad Yunus put it, light up the unquenchable desire in each of us to make a difference in the world. Please join me in welcoming Sam Daley-Harris.
Thank you. It is a great honor to be here. We had a book club session this afternoon that was astounding, and I'm thrilled to be here. And I want to thank the McCarthy Center for Public Policy and the Center for Global Education for hosting this lecture and the other events around it. And I want to say one other thing, because this is one of 21 lectures this fall. I mean, this week was Indiana University, the Humphrey School, and tomorrow night's Northwestern. And there's, whatever the math is, 17 others in addition to that. If you want something done, contact Paula Ramley. Where's Paula? Where is she? Oh, there she is. Yeah, just an amazing job. Thank you, and thanks to everyone who was involved in making this happen. I want to thank everyone who's come with a quote, and it's a quote from the late Republican senator from Oregon, Mark Hatfield, who said, "We stand by as children starve by the millions because we lack the will to eliminate hunger. Yet we have found the will to develop missiles capable of flying over the polar cap and landing within a few hundred feet of their target. This is not innovation. It is a profound distortion of humanity's purpose on Earth," end of quote. And I say that your being here tonight is an expression of your commitment to correcting that distortion of humanity's purpose on Earth, and I thank you for that. The other quote that I want to start with is, it's actually new to me, it's not a new quote, from Mark Twain, who said, "The two most important days of your life are the day you were born and the day you find out why," end of quote. And this lecture is very much about the why. And I would say everyone wants to matter. Everyone wants to make a difference. Everyone wants to contribute, to give back. Everyone wants to leave the campsite cleaner than we found it. Now, that's all stuffed down underneath discouragement, cynicism, despair of one kind or another. And yet I think it's true for all of us. And this lecture is very much about finding out the why and acting on the why at a national and global level. As they mentioned, there'll be some book signing and tabling at the back. There's a sign-in sheet that's right here, and it's going to start going around. I urge you to sign it. I want to say one other thing about the talk before I do a reading. The basic premise of the book is that we all experience some despair about making a real difference on big issues we care about, and that despair is unwarranted, and that there are tools, there are people that are showing that it's unwarranted, and there are tools that can help you make the difference that you want to do, that you want to make. Now, some other essence of the talk is not so much about this was accomplished, isn't that great, but the how was it accomplished. So there's a lot of the how in this talk, but I want to start with an issue. I want to not assume that, well, you know, we're all crystal clear about something or other that needs doing in the world. So I'm going to do a short reading. This is an excerpt from a New York Times article. It was on the front page, above the fold. It was about 6 or 7 years ago. It was titled Africa's World of Forced Labor in a 6-Year-Old's Eyes. Oprah Winfrey did a whole hour on it several months ago. It's about child labor in Africa. And I ask that you take a moment and consider a 6-year-old you might know. Son, daughter, niece, nephew, grandson, granddaughter, neighbors, friend's child, some 6-year-old that somehow might be in your life as I read this short excerpt. Just before 5 a.m., with the sky still dark over Lake Volta in Ghana, Mark Kwadwo was rousted from his spot on the damp dirt floor. It was time for work. Shivering in the pre-dawn chill, he helped paddle a canoe a mile out from shore. For 5 more hours, as his co-workers yanked up a fishing net inch by inch, Mark bailed water to help keep the canoe from swamping. He last ate the day before. His broken wooden paddle was so heavy, he could barely lift it, but he rapidly followed each command from Kwadwo Taki, the powerfully built 31-year-old in the back of the canoe, who freely deals out beatings. I don't like it here, he whispered out of Mr. Taki's earshot. Mark Kwadwo is 6 years old, about 30 pounds, dressed in a pair of blue and red underpants and a Little Mermaid t-shirt. He looks more like an oversized toddler than a boat hand. He's too little to understand why he's wound up in this fishing village, a 2-day trek from his home. But the 3 older boys who work with him know why. Like Mark, they are indentured servants leased by their parents to Mr. Taki for as little as $20 a year. End of quote. I'm going to read that last section. He's too little to understand why he wound up in this fishing village, a 2-day trek from his home. But the 3 older boys who work with him know why. Like Mark, they are indentured servants leased by their parents to Mr. Taki for as little as $20 a year, end of quote. I've read this to thousands of people. And every time I read it and I conclude that section, I always say this: I am crystal clear that well-targeted microfinance, microloans, well-targeted meaning to the very poor, and well-run, it has to be well-targeted and well-run, can help parents care for their children and not have to resort to actions like this. And one of the reasons I say this is 20 years ago, I was with Muhammad Yunus, the Nobel Peace Prize laureate, and I asked him, what's the first thing a woman does with the profits from her micro business? Thinking he would say, well, the first thing she does is she puts her children in school or she feeds the family. But no, that's not what he said. He said, usually the first thing she does is she brings her children home. She couldn't afford to feed them, and so she would put them with some other family to sweep or clean, barely in exchange for a handful of rice. And the first thing she does with the profit from her micro business is she brings her children home. What I'd like to do is I'm going to just letting you know that the first section of the book is on results, and I'm going to talk about that in a moment. One of the new chapters is on Citizens Climate Lobby. I'll talk about that second. And then another new chapter is on the Center for Citizen Empowerment and Transformation, and that's going to be a bit of the piece that undergirds how this progress was made, and I'll share that as we go. But let me begin with my story. I often say I'm doing as many interviews as I'm doing lectures, and an interviewer often on the radio will say, well, tell us how results is creating the political will to end global poverty. And I know in my brain that most of the listeners on the radio feel some hopelessness, some disdain, some cynicism about A, the ability to end poverty in the world, and B, to work with the political system in that regard. So I'm always anxious to tell my story, which is from my hopelessness into action, so people can get a sense of that for themselves. I have a bachelor's degree and a master's degree in music, and I played percussion instruments in the Miami Philharmonic Orchestra in Florida for 12 years, and I taught music in high school. And then I started a citizen lobby group on ending global poverty. And I'm often asked, you know, kind of what was that about? And what motivated that change? And when I look back in my life, there are two events that come immediately to mind. I graduated from high school in 1964, and maybe quite logically, I played timpani in the orchestra at the ceremony. Just before the ceremony, a flute player came back to the percussion section and told me that a high school fraternity brother of mine, a year younger, had died the day before in a tractor-trailer accident in Georgia. Now, I'm in a kind of a mixed room. I mean, what I'm about to say is I was 17 when I kind of want to say, who remembers 17? Well, probably a number of students in the room remember 17. But when I was 17, I thought I had forever. I mean, mortality was not an issue. But during that time of the funeral and mourning period, after the funeral, I went with my friend's younger brother to collect his report card from the homeroom teacher. It really dawned on me that maybe I had 17 more minutes or 17 more months or years, and the questions of purpose began to come up. Why am I here? What am I here to do? That why. The two most important days in your life are the day you're born and the day you find out why. And so I had these questions come up and no answers. 4 years later, it's June of 1968, college graduation day, and right around that time, Robert Kennedy is assassinated. And it's another one of those, what is this life? What is this death? Why am I here? What am I here to do? No answers. But I think this is I don't believe you have to have a friend die to ask these questions. It can come out of a great book or a conversation or some movie or something that these questions become important to you. Then I get to the next step, which is clarity on an issue. In other words, most of us carry around these unexamined assumptions about peace is impossible, climate change is hopeless, global poverty, give me a break. These assumptions about what's true and about these various and other issues. Well, here's my journey into getting closer to the reality. 9 years later, after college graduation day, I'm invited to a presentation on the Hunger Project, on ending global poverty. And I went, but I thought hunger was inevitable because, well, there were no solutions because, well, if there were solutions, somebody would have done something by now. But I went into that presentation and I realized the obvious. There was no mystery to growing food. There was no mystery to clean water, basic health, basic literacy. None of that stuff was mysterious. That I wasn't hopeless, as I thought, about my perceived lack of solutions. No, I was hopeless about human nature, that people would just never get around to doing the things that could be done. But there was one human nature I had some control over, my own, and my questions. Why am I here? What am I here to do? And so I started to get involved. And I started by speaking to high school students. And in 1978 and 1979, I know some of you weren't even close to being born yet. In 1978 and 1979, I spoke to 7,000 high school students. And before I went into the first classroom, I read some statements from the National Academy of Sciences, Food and Nutrition Study, and others calling for the political will to end hunger. So I asked 7,000 high school students what the name of their member of Congress was. I didn't want to know if they wrote him. I didn't want to know if they met him. Just the name. Now, who knows this story? Raise your hand if you know this story. Hi. Okay, don't answer. How many knew, out of 7,000, how many knew the name of their member of Congress? Anyone who's not familiar with this story? Guesses? Don't be shy. You want to say 0. Go ahead. No. Any guesses? 10. There you go. A bit more of an optimist over there. Yeah, actually, 200 knew, fewer than 3%. 6,800 didn't know, just over 97%. And results started out of this gap between the calls for the political will to end hunger on the one hand, and the lack of basic information on who represented us in Washington on the other. And I'm going to actually give you this other quote that kind of fuels this kind of action. It's from futurist and inventor Buckminster Fuller, who said, "The things to do are the things that need doing, that you see need to be done, and that no one else seems to see needs to be done." And well, I saw something that needed to be done, and so I went ahead and did that. I'm going to go over a couple of victories just to give you some idea of some action and some progress, and then I'm going to begin to go over some of what undergirded it. So in 1986, Results Volunteers, there were about 60 chapters in the US, generated 90 editorials, not letters and op-eds. There were more of those, but where the Minneapolis Star and Tribune or the Atlanta Journal or the Miami Herald wrote an editorial calling for a tripling of the Child Survival Fund from 25 million a year to 75 million a year. And we'd get 4 editorials in the office, and then we'd mail them with a cover letter to 100 key leaders in Congress, the administration, UN agencies. You didn't have to live in Portland, Oregon to see the Oregonian editorial kind of thing. And at the end of the campaign, Jim Grant, the late director of UNICEF, wrote in the margin to one of our cover letters this note. He said, "I want to convey my heartfelt thanks for the unflagging and satisfyingly successful efforts of Results on behalf of vulnerable children and mothers everywhere. I thank you in my mind weekly, if not more often, for what you and your colleagues are accomplishing, but I thought I should do it at least once this year in writing." And we continued to lobby for these programs year in and year out and decade in and decade out, such that the bilateral funding has gone from 25 million in 1985 to some 600 million a year today. This is a comment from the deputy director of UNICEF back at that time, Kul Gautam, who said in a New York Times article this year, to a great extent, it was because of the receptivity created by Results that the US funding for child survival increased so dramatically, starting in the mid-'80s, and that led many other countries to come on board. So this is what I want you to see. When we started lobbying in 1984, UNICEF told us that 41,000 children under the age of 5 were dying every day from largely preventable malnutrition and disease, things like measles coupled with malnutrition or tetanus coupled with malnutrition, et cetera. And the latest statistic, it came out about 2 weeks ago, is that that number has gone down from 41,000 a day in '84 to to 18,000 a day now, still scandalously high, but you get a sense that if you were working on this as an advocate, you could have some sense of ownership of that kind of progress. I'm going to do one more, and then I'm going to get to what undergirds this kind of change. In 1987, the volunteers generated 100 editorials in the first legislation ever for microfinance for the very poor. In August of 1987, volunteers arranged for 28 editorial writers, 14 the first hour and 14 the second, to join a conference call with Muhammad Yunus 19 years before he received the Nobel Peace Prize. How do you do that? He was an unknown person with an unknown intervention, microfinance, in a little talked about country, and 28, I'm going to describe how he did that in a moment. After he received the Nobel Peace Prize, he said, "No other organization has been as critical a partner in seeing to it that microcredit is used as a tool to eradicate poverty and empower women than Results and Results Ed Fund's Microcredit Summit Campaign." And when we started lobbying in 1986, there were 1 million around the world with a microloan of the very poor. The latest count is 124 million. Now, this field has gotten a little off track, with some fork in the road of this field asking, what more can we do for our clients, the right question, and another fork asking, what can we do more for our investors, the wrong question. But still, there's been some amazing, important, useful progress along the way. So what does it take to empower citizens like this? I'm going to give you an example of this structure of support. One piece that almost every NGO gets wrong is focus. And they get one of these two wrong or both. One is focus, meaning they flit from issue to issue, thinking that it'll keep volunteers interested. It doesn't. It just keeps them dizzy, kind of thing. Or if the group focuses, it doesn't go deep. And so what I'm going to do right now is look how, sorry, it's right here. I'm going to look at how volunteers who are not expert in the media, who are not expert on microfinance, were able, and then became more expert, who started as volunteers not expert in those areas, were able to get 28 editorial writers on a conference call with Muhammad Yunus in 1987. And I'm going to use as my example a conference call, a nationwide conference call. There might have been 200 or 300 across the country, 4 in one room, 6 in another, 3 in another, like that. And the conference call will have, this is postdoc organizing on global issues, so listen up. So the conference call would have a guest speaker, hopefully inspiring, Q&A. There would be a moment where a victory was discussed. Someone met with their member of Congress or generated an editorial. Then there'd be a moment where people would learn to be more articulate, a role play or some exercise to learn to be more articulate. And then they might write a letter to Congress or to the newspaper or whatever. So I'm a volunteer, and I'm going to walk you through June. It's January of 1987. We have a guest speaker on the conference call, microfinance, quite interesting, good Q&A, some grassroots victories. We learn a little talk about microfinance, and then we write letters afterward to our member of the House of Representatives. I'm a volunteer. It's Saturday. I'm inspired. Monday comes, and I do nothing. I just don't do anything. I forgot, or I was busy, or whatever. It's now February. We have a conference call guest. This one's really inspiring, good Q&A, some grassroots victories. We learn another little talk to be more articulate on microfinance. We write a letter to one of our senators. It's now Monday. I'm stoked, and I get up and I get on the phone. I call the editorial writer, and they never call me back. Okay, now it's March. Stay with me. We have a conference call guest, quite inspiring, good Q&A, grassroots victories. I learn another slightly different little talk about microfinance, write a letter to my senator, the other senator, and on Monday, I get on the phone, I call the editorial writer, and he answers by mistake. He thought it was somebody else calling. He was waiting for another call, and he answered, and it was me by mistake. But we're on the phone for a moment, and we talk a little bit, and he says, well, can you send me something? Well, it's 1987. I can't email anything, so I either get in the car and drive it over, or I put a postage stamp on it and put it in a mailbox and send him the little packet for editorial writers. It's now April. And we have a conference call guest on microfinance, Q&A, some grassroots victories. We have a little talk that we learn. We write a letter to the president, President Reagan. I'm really stoked. I get on the phone on Monday. I call the editorial writer up and I say, can I have 10 minutes? Maybe you'll just come down to the lobby. Maybe we could have coffee. He says, yes, we'll do 10 minutes. We get together. 10 minutes becomes 25. He looks me in the eye and he says, I'm not going to write on this. Why don't you write an op-ed for the newspaper? Well, I've been on all these conference calls, Q&A, learning talks, writing letters. I write a darn good op-ed, and it's published in early May. So now I'm on the May conference call guests, Q&A, grassroots victories, that's me. I talk about how I got my op-ed in the paper. We learn a little talk. We write a letter to the representative again, let's say, and now it's June. And in June, I learn that there'll be a conference call in August with Mohammed Yunus of the Grameen Bank. I call my editorial writer up. He feels a little guilty because he hasn't done anything. He's actually liked my op-ed, thought it was quite well written. And he's quite curious to hear this guy talk because we've been discussing it since around March kind of thing. And so he says, yes, I'll be on that call. Do you see how if we worked on microcredit for 2 months, January and February, and then switched to basic health, March and April, and then switch to basic education in May and June, and then switch to World Bank reform to keep people interested, there's no way I would have succeeded. I couldn't have done it. So the focus, number one, and the going deep with the issues and some of the experts. So now let's look at how this empowerment and transformation methodology has been implemented more recently. It's July of 2007, and I get a phone call from a friend from Results. His name is Marshall Saunders, and he said, I saw An Inconvenient Truth, Al Gore's documentary, 3 times in 10 days. And then I went to Nashville, and I was one of the 1,000 people who learned to present the slideshow. And then I went home to San Diego, and I led it 43 times. But early on, I realized I was giving people 98% the problem and 2% what they could do about it. And they couldn't buy enough Priuses or change enough light bulbs to make up for what the government was or wasn't doing. In fact, he said, one morning, I was reading the paper, drinking my coffee, and I saw an article that said Congress had just appropriated $18 billion in subsidies for the fossil fuel industry yesterday. And yesterday, he said, I had convinced 18 people to change their light bulbs. This is never going to work. So he called me up and he asked me if I would coach him in starting Citizens Climate Lobby. And we talked several times a week at first. He had his first meeting. Last Sunday was their 6th anniversary. So last Saturday, they weren't yet 6 years old. There were 29 people in the room in San Diego. He hoped that 4 or 5 or 6 would raise their hand and be the first chapter on the planet of Citizens Climate Lobby. Actually, all 25 raised their hand, and they started 3 chapters that afternoon. And now, 6 years later, they have 131 chapters in the United States and Canada. And I want to give you a flavor. This is what it looks like to go way beyond mouse-click advocacy. Their groups in 2010 had 36 letters to the editor published on their issue, which is a carbon tax and a dividend rebated in full to the public. The next year, they had 181 published, 537 published last year, and in the first 9 months of this year, their volunteers have had 873 letters to the editor published. They had 20 op-eds, In 2010, 39 the next year, 87 last year, and in the first 9 months of this year, they've had 153 op-eds published. In 2010, they had 105 meetings with members of Congress or their staff, 255 the next year, 534 last year, and in the first 9 months of this year, they've had 639 meetings, including grassroots-generated meetings with Eric Cantor, the House Majority Leader, with Paul Ryan, the chair of the Budget Committee. And so if you want greatness from volunteers, you have to provide a great structure of support, and that conference call was an example of it. And what I'm going to do is I want to take a moment to show you how a conference call can be done in a disempowering way. So you could say, I heard this guy talk, it was great. I think the secret is having conference calls. I have my little group, whatever the group is, we're going to go do conference calls. Well, you can do that in a disempowering way, or you can do it in an empowering way. Guest speaker. So let's say you have a really good guest speaker every month, and they talk the entire 25 minutes. That leaves everyone on the call a bump on a log. It's not empowering. That's the wrong way to do it. If you insist that the speaker talk for 10 minutes and have 15 minutes for Q&A, it's interactive, it's energizing, and it's empowering. Grassroots victories. You remember I talked about grassroots successes? Well, if someone gets on the call and says, I met with my member of Congress yesterday, it was a blast, I can't wait to do it again, but they leave out that it took 11 phone calls to get the appointment, that they had to meet with the district director first, and that their knees were knocking before they went into the appointment. If you leave that out, everyone around the country listening to the call goes, boy, we've made 2 calls and we haven't gotten in yet. I guess we should give up on. No, you gotta tell it from the struggle to the success, not just the success. And that's the empowering way to do it. The last one is practicing to be articulate. Well, this is one. Has anyone in the room been on a webinar with a state or national organization, like to learn a bit more? Yeah, usually those are A, boring, maybe not. B, they would never do this part, practicing to be articulate. Or the other disempowering way to do it is someone does a role play. Let's say they do a role play, a call to the aid of Senator Klobuchar on whatever issue, and they do a terrible job. It's awful. But all they can say is, thank you so much for volunteering. You were so brave to volunteer. That's not empowering. If someone does a crummy job and you can't suggest any ways to improve it, you're wasting everyone's time. So you really want real coaching. So what does this look like? I'm going to actually finish with an excerpt, a reading. It's a little bit long. I mean, not hours, but it'll take about 4 minutes or something. I'm going to read an excerpt from a volunteer from Citizen Climate Lobby. And her name is Ellie Sparks. Where's Paul Thompson? Yeah, Paul Thompson, on his way back from a climate conference in Mexico, somehow stopped off in Richmond, Virginia, and discovered this woman. And if he hadn't done that, I don't know. I think the climate movement might have been back a year or two. Thank you for doing that. She said, I was suffering from climate trauma. I would read Bill McKibben's book, Earth, and I would weep at home, and I would weep at work. She said, I was suffering from climate trauma. And then she started volunteering with Citizen Climate Lobby, and 18 months later, she is co-leading a workshop on creating relationships with members of Congress and editorial writers. And so that was a year ago, July, and a year ago, August, she's on their conference call talking about her workshop. And this is, wow, I don't know what's after postdoc. If that early thing was, this is beyond postdoc, this next section. She said, don't forget, she started with climate trauma 18 months earlier. Our director, she said, Mark Reynolds, likes to say we're betting the farm on relationships. Now, he didn't say we're betting the farm on mouse clicks. He didn't say we're betting the farm on messages left at the switchboard. He said, we're betting the farm on relationships. Yeah, relationships. Then he says, go get a relationship with your member of Congress and your editorial writer. Most of us CCL volunteers have never done that before. What in the world does a relationship with a member of Congress look like? How do we connect with an editorial page editor? Some of us have found models for those relationships in other parts of our lives. Gary in Boston uses the work relationship model. This is where it gets, hold on to your seats. My relationship model is different. I adore romantic relationships, so I use romance as my model. That first meeting with the editorial writer, it's like a blind date, only you've decided ahead of time you're going to marry this fellow. Who do you know that talks this way? You're going to be sweet and interesting, not too intense. If it doesn't work with the editor, you're going to marry one of his friends at the newspaper, the business writer, environment writer, city editor. Someone at this paper will find you interesting and compelling. It's just a matter of being persistent until you find the right connection. I see the relationship with a member of Congress as an arranged marriage. If you live in her district, the member's aide has to meet with you. I left this out. Ellie lives in the Richmond, Virginia area. Her member of Congress is Eric Cantor, the House Majority Leader. Her newspaper is the Richmond Times-Dispatch. She said, that's what our congressman's legislative director told us in January. Since then, we've met 7 times with the legislative director. Actually, the 8th time was in June when Eric Cantor was in the meeting too. We schedule 45-minute meetings with him. He keeps us well over an hour. He doesn't want us to leave. Why? Because a good arranged marriage starts out cold and heats up over time. That's different than a love match, which starts out hot and slowly cools down. I see the editorial page writer as a painter. His canvas is the editorial pages. His palette are editorials, op-eds, letters to the editor. I'm his muse, his model. Who do you know that says that about the editorial page editor? I want him to fill his canvas with colors that I like, so I'll have my group send 3 to 5 letters to the editor whenever the opportunity arises. That's how you get 807, not because they didn't get 873. I assume out of 873, maybe they got 10 of them or 15 of them or something. The more colors I put on his palette, the better chance of having him pick 1 or 2 of my favorite colors. Last summer, a year ago, not this past one, he printed 3 climate denier letters from international denier groups. At first, the denier letters felt like a blow to the gut. Then I dug deep for the love language. My editor was proud of his work in standing up for the climate. Those denier letters were in response to his own editorials urging conservatives to conserve the climate. He had been courageous in writing those editorials. He was getting national attention because of them. He was not backing down. I thought he might enjoy a pat on the back from across the country. I called Gary in Boston, a scientist in New York, our director in California. All 3 sent letters. All 3 letters were published. I guess I was right. My editorial page editor likes national attention. This is the last paragraph, and this is just sheer genius. And she's talking about in a moment that at their conference a year ago, July, she met with 20 congressional offices, all of Virginia, all the congressional offices in Virginia, and I assume North Carolina and surrounding states. During our conference, I met with 20 congressional offices. I met with many folks whose view of the world is very different than mine. Going into their offices was hard. I had to let go of a lot of emotional baggage. Now, this is real courage. It is not courageous to say, those jerks would never listen to me. I'm not going to do this. That's not courageous. This is. I could no longer judge them or hold hostility in my heart towards them. I had to let go of my fear of climate change and my fear that they wouldn't listen to me. I had to center myself in love, releasing fear and centering in love. This is sacred and profound work, end of quote. Now, most people would say meeting 20 congressional offices on climate change would be hopeless work or dirty work or useless work. I think we need to get to where Ellie is and see it for what it is, which is sacred and profound work. I'm going to close with a couple of quotes and a drawing. This is from the famous Anonymous. Be outrageous. It's the only place that isn't crowded. You want to be hopeless? Fine. It's very crowded over there. Be outrageous. It's the only place that isn't crowded. This is a drawing in one of the new chapters. On the left of the page is a small circle that's labeled your comfort zone. To the right is a much larger circle, which is labeled where the magic happens. Find an organization that can help you move out of your comfort zone over to where the magic happens. You know what the magic happens looks like? It looks like an email from Ellie on my birthday. You can write this down if you want, November 18th. Last November 18th, an email where she sent me a column from the libertarian conservative columnist, not the editorial page editor, from the libertarian conservative columnist in the Richmond Times-Dispatch calling for a tax on carbon. That's magic. Because she said 22 months earlier, there's no way this guy would have written that in an editorial. I'll close with this, and then we'll go to some questions and comments. This is from George Bernard Shaw's Man and Superman. I'm going to read it twice. This is the true joy in life. The being used for a purpose recognized by yourself as a mighty one. The being a force of nature instead of a selfish, feverish little cloud of ailments and grievances complaining that the world will not devote itself to making you happy. I am of the opinion that my life belongs to the whole community, and it is my privilege to do for it whatever I can. I want to be thoroughly used up when I die, for the harder I work, the more I live. I rejoice in life for its own sake. Life is no brief candle to me. It is a sort of splendid torch which I've got hold of for the moment, and I want to make it burn as brightly as possible before handing it on to future generations. This is the true joy in life, the being used for a purpose recognized by yourself as a mighty one, the being a force of nature instead of a selfish, feverish little clod of ailments and grievances, complaining that the world will not devote itself to making you happy. I am of the opinion that my life belongs to the whole community, and it is my privilege to do for it whatever I can. I want to be thoroughly used up when I die, for the harder I work, the more I live. I rejoice in life for its own sake. Life is no brief candle to me. It is a sort of splendid torch which I've got hold of for the moment, and I want to make it burn as brightly as possible before handing it on to future generations. I thank you so much for coming this evening, for your attentiveness. We're going to go to some Q&A in just a moment, but just thank you. I really appreciate your time with me. Thank you. Good. So they're going to be a student running with the mic.
Yes, we've got Hassini Kalbagi and Dan Antonsen, two of our all-star volunteers who will have mics. So raise your hand if you have questions for Sam, and we'll continue this great and inspiring conversation.
Yes, and you might introduce yourself briefly, and then we're taking questions, comments, and complaints. So if you've got any of those, who's first? Who's first? Anyone want to jump onto the dance floor? Please, come forward, grab a mic. You can introduce yourself and then...
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming today, and it was awesome to have a book club as well. I guess my question is, what made you decide to work within our political structure instead of fighting against it?
Well, the bottom line is, for starters, I was naive, number one. Number two, I was asking, what can I do? Why am I here? What's my purpose? And number three, I kind of saw an issue I wanted to work on. I had no intention of being politically active. But when I saw the calls for the political will to end hunger and asked 7,000 high school students the name of their member of Congress, and only fewer than 3% knew the name, that was it. I mean, I was cooked. I didn't see many others doing that kind of work, and I dove in, and that you see need to be done and that no one else seems to see needs to be done. And then, of course, the job is to help others see it needs to be done. Yeah. Who else?
Hi, Sam. My name is Curtis Sweinrich. I'm the group leader for CCL in St. Cloud. And my question, I guess, is, or it's a comment and a question. One is that in the last couple of months since I've gotten involved with CCL, I've personally experienced that personal revolution, going from despair and despondency into action. And I guess what I would like to ask you is, what sort of advice do you have for people who are just starting, getting into the political arena, as far as, how not to get burned out?
Well, there are a couple of things. I mean, the bottom line is find an organization that will provide you with a deep structure of support, that will move you from your comfort zone to where the magic happens. I'm actually going to read another excerpt that speaks to the predicament that we face on what I just said. And this is a woman in Canada. She read a book that moved her profoundly, and her family decided that they would lower their carbon footprint drastically. They moved to a smaller home and did all kinds of things. And she says this: after all the effort and money to reduce our household's carbon footprint, I realized that while it was much lower than the North American average, it wasn't enough. We needed help. We needed others to drastically reduce their personal footprints too, and only government policy could make that happen. Around that time, I was part of the communications team for a rally on Parliament Hill in Ottawa called C-Day, Fill the Hill. Two things struck me about that experience. One, that journalists are, for the most part, clearly uneducated on the issue. And two, we spent a lot of time and effort on an event that was largely ignored outside of a few thousand people who made a lot of noise outside Parliament that day. I asked myself, what was preventing us from going inside and actually talking to policy and lawmakers about this pressing problem? Why weren't we doing that? End of quote. And then my response, her question, what was preventing us from going inside and actually talking to policy and lawmakers about this pressing problem, reverberates through our mostly hollow lives as citizens. The question is the question for all mouse-click advocates who are serious about systemic change, who want to do more than just lift a finger for the next mouse click. The sad answer as to why we aren't going inside and actually talking to lawmakers is that most people who want big change cannot find an organization capable of empowering them at a level equal to their desire for change. Most organizations ask us for nothing more than a click and a check. They see us as little children who are too busy with play, too distracted, too naive, and too incapable of doing the homework necessary to go really deep with their democracy. But when citizens find an organization that treats them as capable adults, miracles can happen. And so, kind of going back to your question, find an organization that can give you that structure of support. Now, I particularly have asked in all my 21 lectures that there be tabling allowed from Results and Citizen Climate Lobby in hopes that people might be inspired and say, I want to do something, and go back and check those and other tables out. Now, to be honest, you could actually go join one of those groups, participate for a while, to steal the best of their methodology and take it to some other issue you might care about. But the bottom line is, most organizations have methodologies that keep us in first grade and second grade as citizen activists, and you need to find one that'll help you through third and fifth and ninth and 12th and college as an activist. Okay, who else? Please, right here.
Yes, Sam.
one way in
I'm
the-
Paula Romeli from the Center for Global Education. And Sam, I'd like to ask you to elaborate a little bit more on microcredit and the influence. I mean, the growth was phenomenal that you and other groups have been helping to promote. But what does it mean? I think a lot of us maybe aren't as familiar with Grameen Bank.
Okay.
And then what can students do? What can we as our small community, as Gretchen said, do to be involved more in terms of getting empowered and getting involved with our own political organizations?
Right, okay, good, yeah. So first, let me just tell this story, and maybe this will be enough, and we can come back with other questions. The story of how Grameen Bank started. I think when you learn how an organization started, you get the kernel of, hopefully, insight that moved it forward. Mohammed Yunus left his country, at that time it was East Pakistan, to come to the United States to get a PhD in economics at Vanderbilt. He taught for a few years at Middle Tennessee State in Murfreesboro, and then when his country got its independence and became Bangladesh, he actually lobbied in Washington around it for some months, and then went home to teach economics at a university. And there was a famine in the country after the Civil War, after the Independence War, and he said, the economic theories in my textbook are very elegant, but they're not working in the village next to my campus. I'm going to go in the village and learn economics from the villagers. Now, that's the way I usually start the story. What I left out usually was people were dying of starvation nearly on the doorstep of his campus. And this was a young economics professor who was having a spiritual crisis. He said, I used to dread going to my own lectures with their elegant theories. And he said, I'm going to go in the village next to my campus to see, listen to this, to see if I can be of use to one person for one day. That was he didn't say, let's see if I can go in and create a bank with 8 million clients reaching 40 million. No, let me see if I can be of use, to one person for one day. In the village, it was 1976, he met a woman who was making bamboo stools for sitting on, and he asked her, how much money profit do you make every day? And she said, I make 2 pennies a day profit. He said, how is that possible? It's a beautiful stool. Why do you only make 2 pennies a day profit? She said, I don't have the money to buy the bamboo, so I borrow the money from a trader, a moneylender, on the condition that I sell the finished product back to him at a price he sets, and the price he sets barely covers the cost of the bamboo. I make 2 pennies a day profit. He said, well, if you could sell it to anyone, could you make more than that? She said, I could, but I don't have the money to buy the bamboo. I have to keep going back to the moneylender. He had some students go around the village to find out who else borrowed from this trader moneylender. The students found 42 people who needed a grand total of $27, less than one. It was average 68 cents a person. 68 cents to pay off the moneylender, buy their raw materials, make whatever they made, and sell it to the highest bidder. I mean, it might have been a loan for a week or 2 or 3. You know, it was maybe a very brief loan, but 68 cents on average is what it took. This woman went from 2 pennies a day profit to $1.25 a day because now she could sell her stools to the highest bidder. And these 42 borrowers became the first borrowers of what became Grameen Bank, which means rural bank or village bank. And today the bank has over 8 million borrowers, 97% are women, and affecting 40 million family members. And Mohammed Yunus and Grameen Bank shared the Nobel Peace Prize in 2006. So, I mean, it's an astounding story, and this little kernel of an idea that slowly grew and grew from 42 to 8 million kind of thing. Yeah. Oh, sorry, and the other part is how to get involved. Well, you know, there's the how do you get involved in maybe helping make some microloans, and maybe there's also the part that I'm talking about, policy and you know, making change in Congress that could help it along and that kind of thing. Yeah, you know, you'd have to look around for which groups to get behind. Akiva gives you an opportunity to at least look online and study and try and make some decisions on your own. But, you know, there are other possibilities like that too. Good. Next, yeah. Oh, wait, there was one here that I pointed to, and then we can go. Go ahead. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Brother Nick Moe. Could you talk a little bit about the demographic of the groups with which you've been involved in?
Yeah, sure.
'Cause I worry about so many Americans who struggle and work more than full time trying to put food on the table and take care of their kids, that there isn't that much time left over for citizen activism.
Well, yeah, I mean, certainly there are people for whom, you know, it's 2 jobs and 2.5 jobs, and it would be maybe a struggle to take anything extra on. But it's also true, and I want to just say this part, you know, someone can say to me, you know, I have 2 little toddlers, and there's just no way that I can take this on. And someone else can say to me, you know, I have 2 toddlers, and I just have to take this on. I mean, looking in the eyes of my kids, I can't not see what I can do also. So if it's, people have to listen to their own truth and see, you know, how they can find their way through. And you know, I know people who have made very big differences, had little kids and stayed with the little kids for a while, and then came back like gangbusters making, you know, you just have to listen carefully to your truth. You know, the demographic, I would suggest, I don't, to be honest, I haven't studied this really, but I would go to a conference and look. The demographic is too not young, for one thing. I do know that when people are retired, perhaps they have more time and they can devote to this. I mean, that makes some sense. But there is something that needs unleashing that this kind of activity can provide. It doesn't always, but it certainly can. Let's go to someone else right there. And maybe we'll do, do you think 5 or 2 more minutes or 2 more questions? Okay, 1 and then 2. Please introduce yourself.
I'm Manju Parikh, and the question I had is about the atmosphere in Washington. It's so polarized and partisan, and what advice would you give to this audience to be more empowered, not to be defeated by this kind of partisanship?
Yeah, you know, it always gets back to which interpretation will empower me. In other words, one interpretation is, it's hopeless, just look at those guys, I mean, it's a mess. That interpretation will not empower me. It'll empower me to stay home, you know, not get involved kind of thing. Another interpretation is, in spite of what's going on, I know I can make a difference. I'm going to actually read a prayer quickly. There was a volunteer in Results. He actually now works for Citizen Climate Lobby. It was 1985, and his member of Congress was one of a small number who voted against famine aid in Ethiopia, and he actually spoke up forcefully about why he did that and how the churches should handle it and whatever. And he said if Congress was like a sport, we'd be fans in the stands with bags over our heads. We were so ashamed of our member of Congress. But there was another Results volunteer in Houston, Texas, who had a similar problem with his member of Congress, wrote a prayer for his member of Congress and for the group, and the folks in Atlanta replaced their member of Congress's name, and they would read this at each of their meetings, and it goes like this: "Thank you, God, for Pat Swindoll. We know he's a good man who wants to do right in the world. We know he struggles with the same problems we do, closing our hearts to those who don't agree with us. There are no thoughts or feelings that he has that we haven't had, and vice versa. We pray for all of us to learn compassion for people in our own country and far away, for rich and poor. We pray that Pat and we will be less frightened of each other. We pray our focus will be more to love and appreciate him and less to change him. Help us to remember that sharing love with the world is the highest contribution we can make and will lead to children being fed and the planet surviving. Forgive our righteousness and anger. Open our hearts and minds to find the next expression of love for Pat that he can receive. Now, they said that they would read this at every meeting. At first, they would read the prayer and go, yeah. But then after a while, you know, they took it in, and it became true for them. And they would meet him at town hall meetings that were called Chat with Pat sessions, except for they renamed them Spat with Pat because people kept coming with a bone to pick with him and the like. But they'd greet him with a handshake and a smile and some information, and 2 years later, he was A, agreeing to co-sponsor the microcredit legislation, and B, saying, look, I have a column in the local paper and I want to educate my constituents. Do you think you could write an op-ed for me to sign? And Steve Volk said, I was the only person in Georgia, you know, who, or our group was the only group in Georgia who could get liberal John Lewis and conservative Pat Swindoll on the same bill together. And so, yeah, we have to decide that we either want to be the light or we don't. If it's dark over there, we want to be the light or we don't. We either want to be more dark and equal their dark or light it up ourselves, and that's really a choice that we have to make. One more? Is there one more? Okay, here we go.
Hi, my name is Justin. I'm a junior here. I was wondering if you could comment on the goods, the bads of the big nonprofits, Clinton and Gates, and compare or contrast that to what you have done, what Professor Youssef has done, and how they work together, and how maybe one is better or worse. What your thoughts are.
It's a little bit apples and oranges. In other words, Results in Citizen Climate Lobby is not very good at giving $3 billion away every year because we don't have it. So it's not our job. So we don't do that job very well. And let's say they do a good job of it. You know, we don't exactly have the same role as the Clinton Foundation in, you know, knocking heads together with pharmaceutical companies to get the price of antiretrovirals massively decreased. So they do that thing. So they probably do citizen empowerment lobbying terribly, but that's not their gig kind of thing. So it's a little tough to compare when they're clearly different missions. You could say the same field, but different missions and different aspects of the same field. So, yeah. Yes? Have you ever worked with those? Well, actually, the Gates Foundation, I've not been with Results on the board since 1995 when I moved over to start the Microcredit Summit Campaign. And now I'm not with either of those when I started the Center for Citizen Empowerment and Transformation. But the Microcredit's Results has a major grant from the Gates Foundation from quite a number of years. I'm thinking 8 already kind of thing. So the Results Ed Fund has worked for the Gates Foundation, but not me in that way. Yeah. Let me close with a quote. Which one? Well, I'll do this one. I think Paula would like me to do a short one. This one is short. It's from Apollo astronaut Rusty Schweickart, who said, "We aren't passengers on spaceship Earth. We're the crew. We aren't residents on this planet. We're citizens. The difference in both cases is responsibility." And I used to say, in the mid-'80s when we were really getting going at first, we would get up out of our passenger seat and walk up to the cockpit and noticed there's nobody up there. And those cockpit seats are our seats, but we got to do our homework. We got to go deep on the issues so we can. This one woman, this is the last one, I'll keep quiet. This woman in Leeds, England, I was doing a presentation, it was a long time ago, and she kind of got a little irate, and she said, I'll not do the accent, I've never been behind my government's policy. I said, yeah, but have you ever decided where you wanted your government's policy to be and bring it up to where you are? So that's really the opportunity that we have, but we have to engage and we have to go deep. We have to find a structure of support. Don't forget the tables at the back of the room. Raise your hand, wave to us if you're at a table. Don't forget the tables. I'll be signing a few books over there. And thank you so much for having me and for being here. Yeah.